Historically black colleges and universities have been the education foundation for black Americans over the years. These institutions help the pursuit of professional careers, earning graduate degrees, and advancing education. Sports is an integral part of the HBCU experience. Real sport conversations with icons going beyond the X's and O's. This is Historically Black, the HBCU footprint. It is episode 19 of Historically Black.
Yes.
The HBCU footprint. The last couple of weeks we've been focused on Coach Prime and JSU and what they've been doing. But this time we're going to take a step outside the box, K-Mac.
Just a little.
And, man, we're going to go in deep, really. So just get your pen and paper ready because a colleague of ours, a lady I've known for a long time, is Dr. Stephanie Johnson, is joining us. She's a licensed clinical and research neuropsychologist with a private clinical practice in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And while she's on the show, she's a graduate of Hampton University, or Hampton Institute. I think it was in University when she was there. Institute a little older than that. But anyway, she's a graduate there.
With the other HU.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson went, of course, to other schools to obtain her PhD, but she has been really involved in what's going on with the NFL and the CTE process. Of course, she's spent a lot of time with John Hopkins Department of Neurology, and her credits are plentiful, and she's been in this space for a long time. So we're so happy to have Dr. Stephanie Johnson. Dr. Johnson, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
We're doing good. Just to have you come along in this capacity I'm really happy to get you on with us today.
Yes.
Let's talk about concussions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let's start there first. What are concussions?
So a concussion is a type of brain injury that's caused by a blow to the head. So it could be, a sports-related injury. It could be a blow to the head from a car accident, but it causes the brain to move back and forth in the skull, and it can lead to different chemical and physiological changes in the brain. So it's really a brain injury of such.
So, again, welcome to the show, Dr. Johnson. One of the questions I had, and a lot of people have been trying to connect the dots and talk and figure out, like, what is it that having concussions, because everybody knows about having a concussion, people have had them before, but how does CTE, right, play a part, or be a part of, or be, I guess, a part of concussions and people having concussions, and you could eventually lead to having CTE?
That's a great question. And I'm just going to preface this with, we really don't have the true answer because it's still being researched as we speak. But what we think is that repeated blows to the head or repeated head impact can cause pathology in the brain that's associated with CTE. So CTE is a neurodegenerative disorder, brain disorder. Currently, we cannot clinically diagnose CTE. So you wouldn't go to your doctor and he or she would not give you a diagnosis of CTE. However, there are studies, longitudinal studies of pathology, looking at the pathology of the brain. And once they could take your brain and look at some of the changes, the physiological changes that have taken place, then they could give you the clinical diagnosis or the diagnosis of CTE. So what we think is that repeated head hits to the head. So of course it could come from playing sports, playing football, right? That's kind of what we're hearing about quite a lot. But there are other sports that can also mimic or have similar issues in terms of head injuries, such as soccer, rugby. And so these studies are really trying to take a look to see if these are true risk factors for the development of CTE. So we're still, I think, in the early stages of understanding CTE. It came on the scene several years ago. There were neuropathologists that ended up kind of discovering CTE, the pathology of CTE, but we still don't know a lot about what the true causes of CTE are, but we think it's associated with repeated head injury.
And we're having this conversation, and I was just thinking, as a parent watching this, my kids, they're grown. But if I had kids, and I was a former football player, I want my son, I will have wanted my son, if I had a son to play football, a lot of parents are evaluating whether or not they should do that when they start hearing things like what you're saying. So let's talk about that space in terms of youth participating in at a certain level, a certain age, and how, can that adversely affect the conversation we're having now, or does it? It doesn't matter. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I think again with his ongoing studies, looking at the impact of playing contact sports over time,
Right.
Looking at the data currently, of course, we do think there is a correlation with, having repeated head injury, which means if you're playing football, contact football from a very young age, and over time you're having concussions, and you could have what we call sub-concussions, which are full concussions, but they're sub-concussions.
Wow.
Having this happen over and over again, by the time you do make it to the NFL, then yes, you could potentially be at risk. So I think it's about being smart. I wouldn't necessarily tell people, hey, don't play, football is your choice, but be smart about it. Making sure that your school has a protocol, a traumatic brain injury or concussion protocol, the sports program, making sure there are good people who are educated about concussion, who are overseeing your child's sports programs. And so, just trying to be smart and careful. We see problems all the time where, whether it's college football, the NFL, someone has a concussion. And unfortunately, especially back in the day before they had neurologists and neuropsychologists on the professional team,
sure,
they will put them back in the game. And that is one of the worst things you can do is really, like, you get a concussion, right? You need to sit down. You need to be evaluated, and they need to clear you. You might need to take a few days, before you start to play contact sports again. So I think that it's just about being smart and educated. And I think we're going to have to see where the data leads us. But right now, it does look like there is a correlation between, of course, repeated head injury. And again, you may not even get a concussion, but your brain is moving back and forth, is being shifted back and forth. And remember, that's the developing brain in kids, right? We're talking about the developing brain.
Wow.
And so, again, we don't really know what the impact is on the developing brain, or we don't have enough data. But we know that the brain is what we call plastic, right? It can heal itself, especially the younger you are. So if you use concussion, right, and you're 15, there's a good chance that you should be okay. However, you need to be evaluated. So there are mild concussions. There are, concussions that have moderate symptoms associated with it. And then there are those who have severe concussions. And so, again, it's being educated and making sure you have a great medical team on staff that can evaluate children if they do sustain a concussion.
That's good stuff.
Wow, that's outstanding.
Yeah.
So Dr. Johnson, one of the questions that I wanted to ask just leads me right to, you talked about the research and what it takes to actually further develop, diagnosis and treatments and other things. As an underserved community, quite often the African American community in all aspects of life, in the medical terms, is usually underserved when it comes to research and it comes to figuring out, how we're affected by certain things. How is it that, studies and African Americans participating in CTE research studies and other things, or concussion studies, where do we stand with that, and where is that process, or does that make a difference? Does it matter? Is it just all one?
That's an excellent question. So let me start with the fact that pretty much in all clinical research, we are underrepresented. African Americans are underrepresented. So that's pretty much across the board. There's typically has to be more of an effort made with our community to get us to participate in research studies, but often, not all institutions, but unfortunately many institutions don't understand the importance of having to put more time, energy, and effort into recruiting African Americans. But it's critical. It is critical to have a diverse population that you study, because we aren't all the same. And the reason why we're not all the same and how we respond and how genetics play out for each of us in terms of our communities is because we have different socioeconomic and sociocultural variables that play a role. And so that's why it is critical to have African Americans involved in research from multiple perspectives, not just participating in the research studies, but also researchers who are making sure that the clinical questions that reflect issues associated with cultural factors in the African American community are included in research studies. And if we don't have that, then we're only telling a portion of the study. Because let's be real, we know that the NFL is what, 70% Black.
Right.
Okay. And so again, it is critical if the people that we study are homogenous, meaning they're all Caucasian, we're missing a significant segment of individuals who are potentially at risk for developing CTE. So we have to have that population represented, as well as other, minority populations. But we know in terms of American football, African Americans, in terms of at the professional level,
Yes.
it's 70% in the league. So I think we're doing ourselves a big disservice if we don't make sure that we encourage this with our HBCUs, making sure that our HBCUs are involved in research, because they should be at the table. We have all of these longitudinal studies going on in CTE, the big major universities, and we need to have HBCUs at the table discussing, working, and collaborating with these researchers, so we make sure that we understand the entire picture and how it may impact one community versus another, because it does make a difference.
You made me real quickly. You made me think of just a real quick question. What would be one of those cultural variables that you were just speaking about? What would one of those be?
Access to educational opportunity, socioeconomic status. People say, well, how does that play a role, right, in how our brain develops or how we might be?
Like a lot of people probably thinking that watching this and saying, "Oh, I never thought about that," but that's interesting.
Yes, very much so.
So the way it works is that if you're born into poverty, you may not have, let's just say, in the beginning of your life, the same nutrition as another person. So that means nutrition is critical to brain development. What about an enriched environment where you're encouraged to read, you have fantastic academic resources, and how that plays into brain development, which again, because we know that education is neuroprotective, meaning the more educated you are, the more protected you are in terms of the risk of developing neurodegenerative disorders like a dementia. Okay.
Wow.
And so if you already are 10 steps behind in terms of, having access to these types of things, good nutrition, good academic environment, it plays a role in how your brain develops and could potentially, these are things we need to research, but these are things that we have to keep in mind when we are developing studies, because it does play a role in terms of development. And then it goes on to play an important role in terms of the risk for certain illnesses and disorders.
Wow. Very, very powerful. I learned a lot just by hearing those. Culturally, it's interesting when you look at culture and how that
because a lot of people may think
out
that,
to other things.
Participating in these studies is about sticking me with a needle.
Right.
Which is why a lot of people don't participate.
Right.
I'm gonna be honest.
No, that's fair.
What you just mentioned, I think, would probably lend a lot more people to say, so it's bigger than just that, and which is why my participation is key and why I should be involved.
Absolutely. I want to go back, Dr. Stephanie Johnson, in terms of you mentioned HBCUs. I'm real curious because there are some HBCUs that do a lot of research in various areas. And from your knowledge and in spaces you've been, are there any HBCUs involved or connected to some of the entities, like particularly NFL and places like that? They're looking for universities to get involved with the research.
Right. So I'm just going to say I've been trying to research whether there are any of our institutions, of our HBCUs that maybe even have medical schools like Meharry or Morehouse or Howard University who are participating in some of the longitudinal studies. I have not seen it. Again, I could be wrong, but I have not seen it. And I think, again, this is important. If you have the Harvards, and I'm just using Harvard as an example.
Sure.
If you have a consortium of schools that are participating in universities that are participating in this research, why would HBCUs, particularly those that have A, large sports programs, and B, a medical school, not be a at the table collaborating with these researchers. We have researchers who are in neuroscience. We have researchers, clinicians, neurologists, because they convene many multidisciplinary organizations and professions to come to the table to discuss diagnosis and treatments. And again, if we're not at the table, there are variables that are missing that directly impact the African American community. So I think it is something that we need to consider and start pushing some of these major universities, some of the funding organizations. They should make sure that it's a diverse group of organizations and universities that are at the table developing these important protocols.
Wow. I understand. We're talking with Dr. Stephanie Johnson as an HBCU alum yourself, and you think about the statement that you just made, the landscape you just laid out, and is it more on people issuing the grants, issuing the funding, or is it more on us not seeking to be participants in some of these studies? Because I would think that they would be willing to say, if you want to participate, feel free, join us. But I get they're not reaching out, not looking for every last person, but we know that these studies should be out there. Is it not that we're not, as a community, an HBCU community, we're not seeking some of these opportunities?
Well, I think traditionally the research space has been biased like every other system in America.
Right.
Okay, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so the opportunities for HBCUs to participate, even the understanding and having the infrastructure, sometimes it's not necessarily there, but you can partner with other larger universities that help provide support. And so it's important on both sides. So it's important from the funding organizations, the National Institutes of Health, to ensure that they mandate that there has to be African American participation from an HBCU or, a historically Black college, something, as well as our HBCUs, our responsibility to make sure that we participate, to make sure that we're collaborating and developing these relationships with these larger universities that do have maybe a more significant and substantial research infrastructure, but that we need to collaborate, and they need us, they need our participation. So it could work well for all organizations involved, because this is going to push the field forward. So I think the responsibility lies on both sides, but we know that the funding institutions, they're the ones that have the money.
Right.
They're the ones with the money. They're the ones that green light projects.
Yes.
So they could easily say, and I do know sometimes they do, particularly on the side of when you recruit for a study, right? You have to have a certain percentage of minority participants.
Right.
So they need to make it the same in terms of
research,
multi-center studies. You need a certain, percentage of HBCUs or, diversity in terms of the universities that are participating in the studies.
Wow. We're going to wrap up here. I just got to ask you a personal question. How many are there of you, African Americans? I'm serious.
I'm going to say, Dr. Johnson, a lot of things. So you got to narrow that down.
Neuropsychologists and how many? I'm curious. And how many?
There are many. There are not many, but I will say recently there was the development of the Society for Black Neuropsychologists.
Okay.
And so we're small, but we're mighty. Okay. We're small, but we are making an effort to recruit more folks that look like us. And there are in the works specific programs to target universities as well as organizations to encourage African Americans to go into this field, because it really is an interesting field. It's a field that kind of lies between psychology and neurology, because I have my PhD in cognitive neuroscience, so I come from a very specific research background.
Sure.
But it's definitely growing, but it would be lovely if we had more people who look like me, because you can push the narrative. What I'm talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
I want to make sure that we're represented, because again, if we are not represented from every perspective, then we are really not doing ourselves due diligence in terms of the research. And that research does not represent everybody, because you cannot have a homogenous group and say, well, this is one size fits all, because it does not.
Wow. As a lay person, so to speak, in this field, in this industry, in this space, we hear about studies, research, polls, grant, all of these things. If I wanted to say, if someone brought up a poll or research or grant or something, and I wanted to find out how it was represented or how we participated, what would be the easiest way for me to find that?
Well, they do have, so for example, if some of the studies that are going on, there is a lot of information like on the National Institutes of Health website, and just trying to get more familiar with these types of organizations because they give all of the demographics of the studies that they fund. As well as some of the universities, like even like the HBCUs that do have a research infrastructure, if you go to their website, they'll have information about the studies that they have that are ongoing, recruitment, and usually you can get information in terms of the demographics of the recruitment. And so the information is out there. You have to look a little bit, dig a little bit. Right. But what I'm hoping to do is to make sure that we make this information readily available to our community so that we can understand the importance of participating in research and how beneficial it is to our community and moving the field of medicine just across the board forward.
Outstanding.
Well, there it is. This has been unbelievable. Exactly what we were looking for in terms of trying to broaden this whole narrative around, CTE and how it affects the NFL, how HBCUs can get involved. And Dr. Johnson, we thank you so much. You're a true treasure. We're very much proud of you, and keep on doing your work. It's great important for people that look like us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for covering this important topic.
Thank you.
A gentleman that I've been a fan of since his days at Florida State. Most folks know him across the world as Prime Time.
Talk to me.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Deion Sanders, who is leading the Jackson State football team, where they are 8-0.
Talk to me.
Going into this weekend's game against Texas State. He recently said on Tuesday that his players won't be allowed to leave their hotel this weekend in Houston, where they'll take on Texas State.
Texas Southern, actually.
Texas Southern, excuse me. After rapper Takeoff was shot and killed in the city. And he's quoted as saying, "I'm just sick and tired of the consistency of people that are influential to you. They're leaving us consistently. That's our rappers." And his son actually posted this video. Takeoff was murdered in a dice game in Houston where we're going. So that eliminates all of y'all leaving that hotel because it ain't happening until I give you further notice. And so there are so many things to unpack here. I've got a few things to get us started. The first is this a head coach that's more concerned about the player's safety or winning the game? They're on a streak and he wants this W. And could it be both? Another aspect of this is to look at there's actually more crime back home in Jackson than in Houston. So are you going to do this for home games too? Another aspect is this is nothing new. A lot of great coaches have a history of calling for a lockdown. And I'm really interested in how this phrase lockdown began because we know that is something that is used in prison. And so the equating young black men having to be on lockdown, that's so similar to prison term and the connection there and how dangerous that could be. So I'll pause there and certainly have a lot more to pose to you all. So Deion Sanders having his players not be available to go out and enjoy the city or visit with folks. All family and friends must come to the hotel, which of course, you'll have to be admitted in security and all of that.
Well, what is he more concerned about his players or his coaches, right? I mean, the game. I think he's more concerned about his players, but also his players and what it will take for them to play in the game and be successful. And by that, I think the curfew or whatever you lock that, whatever you want to put it at, he's put in place, like you stated, it's nothing new. Teams do it all the time. Coaches do it all the time. Preparing for the Super Bowl, Final Four, you name it. It happens all the time. I think one of the things that he's probably doing is trying to, coming off of all of the media and all of the attention that's starting to build, I'm sure he's starting to see some things on his team that they're maybe becoming somewhat distracted, and I think this would just exacerbate that problem. and he's probably taking advantage of the fact that, all right, let's just slow all of this down. Let's just put a stop to this. I'm not so sure it was about. I think safety may have been a part of it, but I think I would go 70-30, 30% being safety causes and 70% being staying away from all of the attention and the focus in the media and all that stuff.
No distractions.
Yeah,
distractions. Distractions.
Regardless what the crime rate is in Jackson or wherever, I think he used that moment as a teachable moment to his players, saying, "Hey guys, you know," he was saying, "You know, we talking about our lives matter and that kind of thing, and we can shooting each other over a dice game, some crazy stuff like that." And I think he was trying to make a point that you can't be rolling with the same guys you rolled with back in the day, because those guys have different intentions than you have right now. You are trying to make your life better for you and your family moving forward, trying to be a college graduate, maybe play in the league. So he used that those words, and I saw the video, as a teachable moment. And I agree with K-Mac. He definitely cares about his players. I think it's authentic, and I think he really wants to do it that way. And of course, he wants to win too.